Right now, we are walking through Samuel. We've got just basically 3 weeks. We started last week, and we've got today and then next week. And then in October, we're going to start our series through David. So you don't want to miss that. David will actually take us all the way to Christmas. Very, very excited about David. But last week, we talked about how Samuel basically came into the world. He came into the world through a prayer. Through a prayer of his mother, Hannah. Hannah was barren, and she could not have kids. And she asked the Lord, she pleaded with the Lord at his temple there in Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant was. And she pleaded with the Lord, Lord, please give me a child. If you give me this child, I will make sure that this child is dedicated to you and devoted to you. And in fact, I'm going to give this child to you, to your high priest there at Shiloh. His high priest's name is Eli. And so the Lord honored her prayer. And what did Hannah do? Just shows her character. After the child turned around 3 years old, she was able to give Samuel to Eli. Now, that took a lot of faith because Eli had a couple of sons. We talked about this a little bit last week. Eli had a couple of sons who were older than Samuel. And Eli's sons were doing some bad things. They were living in sin. Even though they were sort of the next priests in line, and they helped with the offering and the sacrifice people brought to Shiloh, but they were actually doing things with women that were inappropriate, that worked there at the temple. And God did not honor that. And so Hannah gave Samuel to Eli and to the Lord. And he grew up there at the temple. And we talked about last week how God called to Samuel when he was just a child, maybe a preteen age. God called to him in an audible voice. And he adhered to God's voice and obeyed God's voice. And we even mentioned how Samuel put himself in a position to hear God. In fact, in the temple there was an area called the Holy of Holies. There's Shiloh, and this is before Jerusalem was established as a capital. We're still in the period of the judges. No king was ruling over Israel at the time. And so there in Shiloh at the temple, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant laid. And so Samuel, what he would do is he would actually lie down on the floor up next to the curtain as close to the Ark of the Covenant as he possibly could without going into the Holy of Holies. To the point to where he's like, if God were to step out here in human form, he would have to trip over me or step over me. I'm going to be in God's way so much that he has to notice me. He was so close to God. And so I was encouraged by that, and I'll share that with you. If you want to hear the voice of God, you need to position yourself to hear the voice of God. Amen. Because the voice of God is talking to you. There's so much noise in this world. There's so many distractions in this world. And with that, no wonder we don't hear the voice of God. Of course, another reason why we don't hear the voice of God is because in our culture, you may have seen, especially if you're my age and older, you have seen the decline of the morality in America. And even throughout the world, and you have seen people be lovers of themselves. The Bible talks about that. And doing things what is right in our own eyes. And when that happens, God doesn't speak so much. Now I'm just talking as a whole. I mean, obviously, there's people that I know and people that you may know as well, that they are always in tune and walking with the Lord, and their walk is blameless, and they are trying to live their life in a way that they hear God. They remove distractions. So God does speak, absolutely. But not as much. I remember stories. My grandfather, who was a church planter and a pastor, I remember stories of him hearing the voice of God, like the audible voice of God. I have family members who have actually seen angels. And I'm like going, hey, where can I get some of that? I think it's because God is not speaking to us as much. The voice of God has become rare, much rarer than the days of old. And so Samuel was born at a time when the voice of God was rare. It was the time of the judges, and the time of the judges where it was actually a very dark time. You had some of your great stories like Gideon, and it's so powerful, but there are some dark times, and the Bible describes them as being at a time of Israel where people did what was right in their own eyes. And so we come towards the end of the judges period, a period that lasted almost 400 years after the Israelites entered into the promised land and annihilated their enemies. This judges period is where we come to the end of. And in fact, Samuel will be considered sort of that last judge and that prophet of Israel. And so we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 4. So I would encourage you to open your copy of God's Word to that. We also have it on the screen. But so we're gonna pick up right where we left off. Now Samuel is probably an older teenager by this time. There's a few years that lapse between chapter 3 and chapter 4. But we're going to be in chapter 4, verse 1 and 3, just for right now. It says this: Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. That's the enemy. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines at Ephek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." I want to pause there for a little bit and say this, so just to recap there a little bit. The Israelites were fighting the Philistines. The Philistines killed about 4,000 of them. Now, obviously, there's a problem. It could be a military problem. Maybe they didn't have the right training. Maybe they didn't have the right strategy. But the Israelites or the elders realized, okay, I think this might be a spiritual problem. This might be a spiritual problem, which it was. And so what they did is they actually went to Shiloh, got the Ark of the Covenant. So let's just go get this Ark of the Covenant and let's bring it with us. That really wasn't the problem. Wasn't that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. The problem was the people of Israel were living a life and doing things like what was right in their own eyes. The Israelites as a nation, they were living in sin. They were not following the Lord. And even the high priest was overlooking the sexual immorality of his sons, the other priests, at the temple. At Shiloh, the Ark of the Covenant. This is a big deal, y'all. This is huge. And so the elders, rather than looking inward at themselves, they looked to a solution. Well, of course, this is a solution. We need the Ark of the Covenant. Just like in the days of old, with Moses and Joshua, how we led out in military campaigns and we had the Ark of the Covenant out front. And so, rather than looking at themselves, they were looking at a solution. They went straight to the solution rather than trying to figure out what was really the problem. What was really the problem? You know, we kind of do that in our lives today, don't we? Let me give you a simple example. Every once in a while, I'll get a headache, and it's really big, and so I was like, I got a headache. So what do? I immediately take some headache medicine. So I take some headache medicine, and a certain amount of time, it's gone. Well, rather than trying to identify why I got the headache, I go straight to the solution. Well, it's just going to remedy this problem, and it goes away. Well, guess what? It'll come up again a few days later. And so if I look back and think about it, what are some of the things that I am doing? I'm looking inward. What are some things that I am doing that's causing a headache? Let's go back and see. So if I go back and see on those times and I realize I have a headache, it's like, okay, well, I didn't drink much water at all. In fact, I had a cup of coffee in the morning, and it was late afternoon, and around probably about 4 o'clock, and I had very little breakfast and no lunch, and very little water. That could be the problem, right? Yep. So rather than trying to fix the problem, I went straight to the solution. I went straight to what I think is the solution. It's the quick fix. Rather than trying to alleviate the issue, the lifestyle change that I was having. And you may sense that in yourself as well. Let's say if you're here today and you got some financial stress. Maybe you're living under a lot of debt, or you've got a lot of medical bills, or you're just not really living in a budget, and you want to get things better, obviously. So you could try to go automatically to a solution, or you could look inward and say, okay, here's the reason why this is happening. It's because I got a debit card. And I got a debit card, and I can spend whatever I want. Our teenage kids, our older kids, are learning the value of money a little bit at a time, because some of them have a debit card that comes out of their bank account, and they have jobs, and they're understanding that, wow, this thing goes fast. I can't eat at Taco Bell every day, can I? Well, no, you can't. Well, you can, but you'll run out of money. Then you won't have money to pay gas, and then you'll have to be like Jesus and walk everywhere. So, maybe you're sitting here today and you have some marriage strife. Maybe there's just something not right. Something not right. And then so you think, well, we just need to go on a vacation together. That'll be the solution. We'll join together. We'll go to the Caribbean for a week, or we'll go on a cruise, and that's going to fix it up. That's just a Band-Aid. It's a temporary solution to a problem that will always exist if something doesn't change in the heart. Something doesn't change on the inside. And so there's many examples that you and I have in our lives where we could go straight to a solution and try to fix it, or we can go inward and look at the problem. And so instead of evaluating their own sinful lifestyles as a cause of God's absence on the battlefield, the Israelites went straight to what they thought was the solution. They needed the Ark of the Covenant, the glory of God, just like the days of Moses and Joshua. And we see what that looks like in verse 4 of that same chapter. It says this: so the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, who was enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. So Eli's two sons, who were, they weren't living a life of holiness. They actually brought the Ark of the Covenant. Now the Ark it's about 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, and about 2 feet tall. And it has these cherub angel sculptures on it. And I mean, you go back and read in Deuteronomy how this thing's made. It's really beautiful. But back at around Deuteronomy chapter 20, there's specific instructions that God gives about the Ark of the Covenant. You just don't go grab the Ark of the Covenant. You just don't. It's like a kindergartner. You tell a kindergartner, hey, go under my bed, under my mattress, and there's a loaded pistol, and just bring it to me. You wouldn't do that. Of course you wouldn't. And so, because the Ark had the holiness and the presence of God, there were specific instructions. You cannot just go grab the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, nowhere do we see where the elders of Israel said, let's go to the high priest, or let's ask the Lord to see what we need to do, or let's ask God to bless this, or let's ask God to walk with us, and let's do this right. Let's follow what God said. How about that? No. What do they need? Oh, go grab the Ark. You know, that box. You know, I mean, it worked for Moses. It worked for Joshua. Let's just go grab that thing. We'll put that out in front, and we'll go to battle, and man, we're going to win. It'd be awesome. Just like in the days of old. We're going to show those Philistines who we really are. You know, because we're the Israelites. We are the Israelites. Nobody messes with us because we have God on our side. The problem is, they didn't realize this, but God was not speaking to them. And God had moved away from them as a nation. God had moved away from them because they were doing what was right in their own eyes. And the voice of God was rare. And God was like, you're not acknowledging me. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to even assist you with this because you're not bringing me into these conversations. You're not bringing me into the battle. And so, instead of searching their hearts and confessing their sins, they decided to imitate what the people, the leaders did in the past. So, how does this hit home with us? You know, I always try to answer this question, Frank, what does this have to do with me? I don't even know what the Ark, I thought the Ark was something that Noah built. I have no idea what you're talking about, you know. What does this have to do with me? Come on, bring this back home because, you know, yeah, you mentioned earlier, I got stuff, I got junk. Yeah, you got my attention. So what do I do about this? Well, as we look at this, as believers today, we need to get over the idea that God will bless us in spite of our disobedience. Now, I'm talking to believers here. I'm talking to people here today who you, at one point in time, you have accepted Christ as Savior. You invited Jesus Christ in your life. So I'm talking just right here at this moment. I'm talking to believers. You know, as believers, like the Israelites, we feel like, well, gosh, I'm a Christian. You know, God's on my side. God gives favor to me. God knows the plans He has for me to prosper me. God's going to do great things for me. Yes. Yes. Those are all true. Those are all promises. But as believers today, we need to get over the idea that God will bless us in spite of our disobedience. As a believer, if you ever disobeyed God in anything, raise your hand. Come on. You don't hand raise, you're a liar. When we think we deserve something just because of our Christian label, without any work of obedience on our part, I call this Christian entitlement. Ooh, there's that word. Entitlement. We think we're entitled to the glory and the blessings and the favor of God. We're entitled for that just because we are believers. Can I tell you something? The only thing we're entitled to, even as believers, the only thing we're entitled to is death. Now, as we accept Christ as Savior, and we live for Him, and we truly follow Him, then that eternal death we can escape. The eternal death of hell, separation from God. But the only thing we're entitled to is death. Everything we have on this earth doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And so, but as believers, we tend to have this idea that, well, I'll just depend upon God. I know I've got a few areas that I'm not really obeying. And I'm talking deliberate disobedience, y'all. I'm not talking about mistakes. Because God's grace is going to take care of our sin every time, as long as we are obedient in confessing that sin. He is faithful and just to forgive us as we come to Him with a contrite heart and a heart of humility. Yes, but I'm talking about, man, that area in your life, in my life, where every time we're just not really walking in that obedience. We're not walking in that obedience. So what happens when we don't walk in that obedience? Look at verse 10 through 11. What happened? So the Philistines fought. So they've got the Ark of the Covenant, right? That box. So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated. And every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The Ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons had died. So they thought they were entitled to the glory of God. And even though they were living a life of obedience, they said, we'll just put this ark out here because God's going to bless us. It was a rout, y'all. It was a rout. 30,000 soldiers dead. The first time was only 4,000. They were better off just like, okay, time out, we're going to go back and we'll see y'all next fall at the next, battlefield or whatever. We got to regroup. We got to search our hearts. We got to understand what's really the problem. What's really the problem? Not just go directly to the solution, but what are we doing wrong? So, what does your spiritual entitlement look like? What does your spiritual entitlement look like? Look, y'all, I've seen social media. I've seen social media, whether it's people here at Lake Point Church or people that I know that are believers at other churches, whether it's around here or other states that I'm friends with and everything. And listen, let me tell you something. I'm going to be honest with you. Some of you, some of us, and I'm going to talk about myself here in just a minute. But when you look on social media and you see in the description, the profile, follower of Jesus. Yes, that's awesome. But then they share a picture of a word that is profanity. And I'm talking about like the big league profanity, right? I'm not talking about the Christian cuss words, you know. I'm talking about the big league profanity. And I'm like, well, that's weird. I thought they were living their life like I'm a follower of Christ, but then you scroll down. Yeah, I stalk some of y'all. It's okay. You stalk me too. It's called accountability, right? And I'm not talking, I'm talking about just people in general. I'm not talking about just everybody in here. Obviously, I'm talking about other people as well outside of this church and outside of this county. But listen, you have seen that as well. You have seen that as well. Something's not right. Last week, I looked on social media and I saw that my wife was at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, and it showed that she was going to Los Angeles. And it showed, you know how they do the map of like Atlanta to Los Angeles, and it shows it. And it put in there saying, you know, get ready to enjoy a great trip. And I'm like going, what? I mean, you picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille. 6 hungry children. But it was like, okay, I know things could be a little crazy around the house. And so I just thought I would just text my wife, baby, is everything okay? Are we okay? Because it had been a rough week the week before. And of course, we realized that somebody has hacked her account, and we had to go through all that unhacking and stuff and whatever. But you look at that, it's like, that doesn't match my wife. My wife, Jesus, would not do that. She would not. And so, it's the same way with us as believers when we have a profile, a description of follower of Christ, and we do something else on social media. Let me tell you what. Here's another thing. Ladies, I'm gonna talk with you just for a second. And I'm just saying as a man to you, and I'm even talking to the teenage girls. Look, as a loving pastor, I'm going to say this as loving as I possibly can. I'm doing it just because I love you. Just don't put pictures of barely covered bodies on social media. Okay, you can easily cause people to sin. Okay, I just want to encourage you to do that. I just feel like I need to share that. Okay, I'm not saying you can't go to the beach. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying you can't wear a bikini. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is this: just be careful what you put online. You are a blood-bought believer. Post like it. Amen. Post like it. And so, I just want you to understand and realize that this Christian entitlement does exist. Now, I did a search for it. There's not really much information out there. I just kind of made this up. But I do believe it exists. We have this entitlement, like, you know, God's gonna save me, you know, from this. God's gonna help me out of this. God's gonna pull me out of this. But then again, you look at their life and you look at some other choices that they're making. And it's like, I think God is silent. I think God might be silent in your life. And so, the thing about Christian entitlement is that area that we are disobedient with, that can seep into, like yeast, the Bible talks about this, into other areas of our life. One drop of little yeast can go through the entire dough. So just like that little disobedience, and y'all, I'm not talking about even just the big things, I'm talking about the little things. And I'm even talking about when God stirs in your heart to do something, maybe you've heard something, me say something, or maybe in your small group, or just in your quiet time, God saying, let's not do that anymore. Let's not do that anymore. I want you to add this to your life. I want you to add maybe tithing to your finances. I want you to get up in the morning and add this extra time in your quiet time with me. Or I want you to start memorizing the scripture. And you feel in your heart you've done that, but you have yet to walk it. Maybe you tried a couple of days or whatever. Maybe you tried this whole tithing thing 1 or 2 times, and you just haven't done it, and you haven't really committed fully to that. Listen, that's walking in disobedience. And so what happens is, when you and I face battles in our life, like the Israelites, we could be defeated in our life all because there's simple disobedience in our life. So I would encourage you today, what are those areas in your life where you just haven't really fully committed and fully obeyed? Some of you might be walking in defeat all the time. Some of you might be walking in defeat all the time. And I don't mean throughout your whole life, throughout every area of your life, but there's certain areas in your life you're just walking in defeat because you're not fully obeying something, whatever that is. You and God know. Now, I'm not saying you got to be perfect. You and I will still sin. Yes, there's grace for that. But as we work out our salvation with fear and trembling, we've got to go before God and we've got to fully obey what He wants us to do. I like to try to be very transparent with you. I've used this before. I like to be frank with you, all right? But, so, an area, and some of you have heard me share this in the past, and I'm still not walking in complete obedience. Your pastor is not walking in complete obedience in this area. And that area is keeping the Sabbath. I'm still struggling with that. You say, just need a day off? Just take a day off. It's hard. It's hard. It's difficult for me. And, people you have your alcoholics, you have your drugaholics, you have your workaholics. I'm a holic. And I think we all are in some capacity. But it's like I just can't seem to just do that. And so it affects other areas of my life. I believe that, any kind of health issues, heart palpitations, headaches, or whatever, is due to the fact that I don't take a day off. It could be, I think, I'm not getting the rest that I'm needing. Why? Because I'm not getting my day off. I'm not obeying the Sabbath. And you may know this, but that's actually one of the big 10 commandments. In fact, in the Bible, it's the longest commandment with the most words. And I'm just still, I'll have some every now and then, maybe once a month. God says, 7th day. One of those 7 days, you got to take a Sabbath. And I'm just not doing that. I have to be honest with you. And I would love for you to pray for me. Now, it could be that you may need to go kidnap me and tie me down and put me somewhere. And if that's the case, then that's fine. But pray for me. But I'm just being honest. But the reason I'm being honest with you is because, look, if me as a pastor, if I'm walking with the Lord, but there's this area that I just struggle with. If I'm doing that, then there's, I'm sure, probably an area in your life where you just haven't really stepped fully in full obedience.
Amen.
So just like the Israelites, don't use the glory of God as a good luck charm. Oh, God help me. God put me through. But I'm walking in disobedience. God will help me with my health problems. God will help me get rest. God's like, I don't think so. You're not walking in obedience. You're not taking a Sabbath. Oh, God will help me with my finances. He's going to pull us out. You're not really tithing. You're not really tithing. God's going to help us with our marriage. We got some issues here. Yeah. I told you to stop flirting with that coworker. You won't stop. So why would I step into your marriage? I know this is it's not a spoonful of sugar message, but it's a message that we all need to be reminded of. We all need to be reminded of. And to know that we cannot use the glory of God as a good luck charm. Now, let me say this. If you are down in the pit of despair in whatever area in your life, cry out to God. He is there. He's always there. He will never leave us or forsake us. Will He be quiet? Yes. Will He be silent? Yes. Will He not speak? Yes. That He will never leave us or forsake us. So if you're in an area in your life and you're in despair, cry out to God and just say, God, what am I not doing? What am I not obeying you? What area? You probably know what it is. And it's probably a small thing. And so one reason why you could be not living a life of victory is because that yeast of sin, of disobedience is spreading the areas in your life. As we close, it's interesting. What we just read in chapter 4, Samuel's not even mentioned. Well, I thought this was about Samuel. Yeah, it is about Samuel. Can I tell you something? Samuel, even as an older teenager, Samuel knew this is wrong. I don't need to follow these two priests, these sons of this priest. I don't need to follow these guys, and I don't need to go and do what I know is wrong. So I'm staying back in Shiloh at the temple of God. So I want to encourage you. When you see, especially students, because you're still being influenced in this life. If there's believers in your life, either students or adults or whatever, and I know that nobody's perfect, but if there's people who are like, man, I believe in Jesus, I live for Him, and they're living a totally different life from Sundays and the rest of the week, you don't need to follow them. You don't need to follow that. Adults, we don't need to follow that. And so I would encourage you to stay back at the temple. Stay back and do what is right. And walk in obedience. And don't be someone who has Christian entitlement. I'm entitled to God helping me because I go to church. That's baloney. No. You want God to help you? Walk in obedience. Walk in obedience. Doesn't mean you're perfect. You're going to mess up. But just those little areas, just little dab, it's affecting areas of your life. So I would encourage you as your pastor. I would encourage you. Just do what you can. If you need prayer about that, if you just go to Connection Point, you can write it on a connection card You drop in the box and I need prayer in this area. You don't have to put your name. We'll pray for you. If you need somebody to talk to, I'm here for you. We're here for you. And we want to do everything we can for you to walk in obedience. Let's do this together. And when you see me, or if you've got my number, okay, I'm going to put this out there. If you've got my number, you have my full permission to ask me, have you taken your Sabbath? You have my permission. Now, if I get 100 text messages, I'm going to have to change that. But no, but really, in all seriousness, help me, and I'll help you. And we'll do this together. All right? Let's pray. Father, as we just walk through this book of Samuel in his life, so glad that he was someone who stayed behind and did not follow what those other people were doing. He knew what was right. And I pray, Lord, that we don't just immediately jump to a solution, but we look inward. What is the real problem? And most often, Father, it's because we are not obeying you in some area in our life. And I pray, Father, you show us that. Give us the strength, the ability, Lord, to do that. And Lord, as we do, we're going to be able to walk in that victory. We're going to hear your voice. We're going to know, Lord Jesus, that you are there. And I pray, Father, that you show us that. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.